Hey, everybody. We feeling good about stuff? We're going to get started in just a second. For those of you joining us who aren't part of the boot camp, that's super okay. That's super chill. If you'd like to join us, we're doing 12-week boot camp. It's all completely free over at Class Central. Oh, hey, yeah. So you're super welcome to join us. We've just finished up the HTML section. So if you're joining us, if you're joining the boot camp now, you're going to have to hurry a little bit to catch up, but not a huge amount. It's not going to be the end of the world. I do apologize. I seem to be allergic to literally everything. So hopefully I won't be like oofing and sneezing too much. Good morning, Garrett. Let's go ahead and get started. Oh, let's go ahead and turn those lights on so I don't look like I'm floating. It's a little bit better. So we're going to head over to freecodecamp.com, which is where all of our curriculum comes from. Just like the boot camp, it's completely free. Everything's so chill. And we're going to get started on CSS today. And you might remember we talked about this a little bit. We're going to be learning 2 languages as part of this course and a couple of like larger concepts. So HTML, HTML is the first language we've already started on. And we're going to be starting on CSS today. And then all the stuff we do after that is going to be combining HTML and CSS to learn more about visual design and learn more about accessibility, all the good stuff that makes your website great. So let's take a look at this. It says 13 out of 28, but I confess that's because I reset these to do them with the Tuesday class. You've probably already done all of this and you've got 28 out of 28 and everything's fine. If you have, this is a fantastic time to celebrate and be very, very smug. If you haven't, everything's still super chill. There's tons of time to catch up. These videos will always be up on YouTube and there's no kind of hurry. But we're coming into CSS today and let's go ahead and get started on that. Or, you know what? I've lied. Let's preview what's going to happen in the rest of the course. We're going to be doing, oh, we can get rid of that signed in message. We're going to be doing CSS this week and next week. That's fine. We're going to be talking about visual design the 2 weeks after that. We're going to be talking about accessibility, which I'm really excited about for the 2 weeks following. And for the last couple of weeks, we're going to be working on responsive web design, a concept that builds on our CSS knowledge called Flexbox. And once we start working on that, you'll be like, oh, it's boxes that flex. Like it feels very much like what it sounds like. And the last thing we're going to work on is CSS grid. And that's going to be the last thing we do together. Afterwards, individually, you all are going to be working on your own final projects. One thing I recommend is you might want to try like just opening some of these final projects and having a look at what they feel like and seeing what parts of these you can start now. I'm going to take us all the way back up in a dizzying, oh heck, not all the way up way. And we're going to come into basic CSS. Let's make this a little tiny bit bigger again, bigger again. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be coming in and taking a look at CSS. What does CSS stand for? CSS are cascading style sheets. And doesn't that sound just wonderfully beautiful? Oh, these are style sheets. These are the rules of style I'm going to set forward for my website. And they're going to cascade. That cascading sounds a little weird. Let's go ahead and feel this out and feel what I want to sort of explore very slowly together is why CSS be called Cascade. And if you want to look it up, it's not cheating. But let's go ahead and see if we can feel out why it might be called cascading style sheets. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to learn by doing, and we're going to change the color of the text. So far in HTML, we've learned to make elements that have headlines. We learned to make our main element, which is super important. Oh, heck, you're already working on your landing page. Do you know what? You're way ahead of the class. You're fantastic. You're brilliant. And you know what? The more of these lessons will make these make sense. If you've already started maybe on your tribute page, trying to do this with CSS is going to feel super weird. Let's go ahead and get you some CSS so you can do some prettier things with that. So we're going to change the style of our H2 element. And what we love to do is we love, whenever we get an example, to copy and paste our example. So we've got our existing H2 up here, and I think that's going to be what we change. But we're just going to copy and paste. Ooh, heck, that's very exciting. We're going to copy and paste this to sort of get a different feel for what we're going to be doing. So what we're doing right now is, okay, we've copy and pasted this example so we can see we've still got our H2, but what's very new is we've got this style declaration. We've got this style attribute. Oh gosh, you're dialing in from Nairobi. Good morning, my love. I think we might be on the same time zone, so hopefully you've had a bit of coffee. You're having a laid back morning. So we've got this CSS style. And I've already told you, oh, do you know what? Creating a CSS, a sheet, it sounds like it should be a separate file, shouldn't it? It should be separate from your HTML. But what we've done here is it's in line. So we've put the CSS declaration, our CSS rules, within our HTML element, which is completely allowed. We're allowed to do that. And I think as we progress through CSS, we're going to get the opportunity to see it sort of conceptually separated. We're staying within the sandbox environment of free code camp throughout our boot camp. But to preview this, we've talked a little bit during HTML before about how when you build a website in the real world, and we actually had a Saturday social where we did a little bit of this. And I'll go ahead and I'll post that video to YouTube right after we're done with this. Where we talked about when you make a website, you have separate files. You've got an HTML file and a CSS file, and then the files for any of the pictures or the videos or other assets you want to use. And here, all of this is going to be sort of the same file conceptually for the moment because we're in a sandbox environment. It's not the real world. It's a little bit abstracted. So it's a little bit, we've taken away some of the complexity to make it easier to learn. And I just want to preview that complexity is going to come back into your life eventually. So I'm going to change the color of our text. We say within our H2, the beginning of our H2 element, we want to add the style attribute. And it's equal to, we want to set it to, and within the quotation marks, all of our set goes, the color, and we've got that colon, the color is going to be blue. And here it says, hey, 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 hey. Oh, Grace, not good morning, good evening. Hopefully it's not too late in the Philippines. I don't have a very good mental model of the entire globe and what time it is right now. Good morning, Ziggy. So it's good practice to end in line. And we just talked about that briefly. Inline means we've put the CSS in the same line as our HTML element. And here it's saying, you know what? It's really good practice to end that with a semicolon. And we're going to do that a lot. So we're going to change our H2 element style so that its text color is red. And if we were being exceptionally lazy, I think we could just change this to red and delete our original H2. We're not going to do that. Not everybody's as lazy as I am. We're going to go ahead and take this example and we're going to copy it. We're just going to type out what it says. We say, well, style is equal to, and I want to set the color. Folks who are not based in the States, how enraging is this? Does it work if I say add in you? Oh, good morning from. See, you know what I'm talking about when I say, "Oh, hey, we've got to write color the American way." I'm terribly sorry. I think you can sub in possibly the global spelling of color if you must. So we want to set this color to red. As soon as I finish the word red, it knows what I'm talking. Oh, it's good afternoon in Hong Kong. Good afternoon, my lovely. So as soon as we set red, it knows what we're talking about. We're going to do our favorite thing and delete this example code we've copied. And I feel very gently confident that when we run the tests, I feel very gently confident that I've done it wrong. Look at this. At the bottom it says, Jess, hey. And like tests are our friend. Even when they're yelling at us, they love us. They say, Jess, your style declaration does actually need that semicolon at the end. It'll work because your browser wants it to work, but you know what? We're going to insist. We're going to lovingly insist that you follow best practices here. Let's run our tests again. Everything's fine. We're 2% of the way done with CSS. That's all chill. You ready to go? So we're going to use CSS selectors to style elements, and selectors are going to be a really, really big part of this. So we've set this specific H2 to be red. What if I wanted all of my H2s to be red? Yeah. And I mean, probably not red. Red seems a little bit intense for all of our. But what if I wanted all of my H2s to look like something? We'd be going ahead and we're going to be creating a style block at the top of our existing file. And you can do this in an HTML file, it won't hurt you. But if it's not weird, I'd love to encourage you to conceptually think of these as a style block does sound a bit fancy, doesn't it? All of CSS, I confess, sounds a bit fancy. At least to me. I should also, while I'm confessing to the internet, I'm terrible at CSS. I'm joyfully bad at it. So we're going to hit a bunch of things where someone will ask a very common sense question. I'll be like, oh, good question. I have no idea. Let's find out together. So here we've got style as a block, but I'd love to encourage you to be thinking of these conceptually as two different files. So really think of the style block as where our CSS file would be. Do you know what? Should we add some comments? We should add some comments. Does anybody remember how to do a comment? It's the exclamation point, isn't it? This is our CSS. It's not a real file, is it? I'm lying. File. Yeah. And let me put a little comment here as well. Hopefully this doesn't feel too conceptually weird, but if we were doing this out in the real world, we were building our own webs, and that's not always true. So you can do things on like CodePen, you can build things in Glitch, where you don't have to build out separate files necessarily. But I just want to prepare you for the real world. When you say, Jess, I need to escape free code camp. How do I do that? How do I? We'll say, okay, well, like let's start thinking of these as conceptual files. Yeah. Oh, Grace is saying that you're beginning. Hey, you're also starting your CSS, but there's a lesson you don't understand. Go ahead and when we get to that lesson, just well, I mean, not yell. You'd have a hard time yelling at me. Just fuss at me when we get to that lesson, and I'm super happy to go over whichever bits are the most useful for you. Is it a lesson from CSS that you're stuck on, or is it a lesson back from HTML? If it's a HTML one we're stuck on, we can go ahead and save that to the end, and I'll leave some time at the end to cover that for you. Everything's going to be chill. So conceptually, we're thinking of these style blocks as our CSS file. Just to preview that, don't worry if it still feels weird. And we're going to go ahead and create a style block like this. And now we're going to do something weird. Does CSS code work in an HTML file and vice versa? Monica, this is such a good question. So you can put your CSS in your HTML file with a style block like this, or in inline, like we've done with the first one. I don't think that you can. I'm gently confident that you can't put HTML in a CSS file and have it work. And you know what? We'll go ahead and we'll put the video that we worked the group video from Saturday up, because that shows us very slowly. We do preview some stuff like using GitHub and using the terminal, which are going to feel big and scary that we're not doing yet. But it does also show that we're building separate files, and that's going to feel really useful. Yeah, so you can put your CSS code in an HTML file. I'd usually recommend keeping them separate in the real world. But I don't think you can put HTML in your CSS style sheet. So inside our style block, we're going to create a CSS selector. And a selector looks cool. And a selector looks like this. I say, hey, you know what? CSS, my beloved CSS. Because CSS, it's not always going to feel like this, but CSS is your friend. CSS wants to let you set rules and do really beautiful things. So here we're going to say, you know what? Every time the selector is saying, CSS, anytime you see H2, I want you to set this rule for me. And right now, so say, hey, you know what? The same way you would have an opening and closing HTML tag, I really need you to have curly braces on each side. Why are CSS brackets spaced out so oddly compared to HTML brackets? This is such a good question. And bafflingly, I'm going to tell you something that I'm going to tell you something that feels like a lie. Technically, they're not. So this spacing we're doing with the CSS right now, this is just to make it human readable. And these conventions in HTML, the way we space this out in HTML, kind of don't matter as well. If I said, okay, well, I'm going to put my click here on a different line than my P, I could go ahead and do that. And that's not going to change the actual output of my HTML. So here, they're just sort of formatted differently because of convention. And I'm annoyed about a lot of things in tech. Well, I'm an old lady. I'm just annoyed. And one of the things that really annoys me, one of the many things that really annoys me, is when we pretend that there are very logical reasons for all of our decisions in tech. And really, HTML brackets and HTML elements and the little Pac-Man brackets and our curly brackets in CSS being spaced out differently is just based on tradition. It's just based on convention. This is the way most people started writing it. And most people, in so much that programmers agree, many of us agreed, hey, spacing it out like this is what other people are doing. I've started to expect it. And we've started to just continue to write it the way people expect it. So weird computer tradition and human readability, I think, are the answers to that. That is such an impossibly good question. Oh, Fab, no worries. If you're stuck on CSS, let's try and get you through that lesson. If it's something we're going to be covering in the next stream, let's go ahead and ask about it in the question and answer at the end, just to make sure that we get you unstuck. These are absolutely just for you. Platypus, you are after my own heart. Say, you know what? If you wanted to, you could write all of your CSS and all of your HTML. Ooh, deep kick. You could write it all on one line if you wanted to. But it's not why. And while I'm moving forward with this lesson, I want you all to think, no, look at you. We've got multiple people saying, yeah, one line. Other folks, and I know Platypus and I know Felis, but both of you are very experienced programmers, so I'm going to be mean to you as the advanced folks in my class. Folks, aside from Platypus and Felis, even though I love you both very much, tell me why you might not want to put all of your CSS on one infinitely long line, or why you might not want to put all of your HTML on one super long line. While you're doing that, I'm going to tab over for this. And this is exactly what Gigi was asking about. Says, hey, what's with this? Oh, Ragnarok is, yep, we want to make it human readable. Computers might be, and browsers might be fine with this all being on one line. But as a human, I recoil from the very idea. And the structure makes it more readable. And Platypus and Felis, it sounds like we're being mean to you, and we're absolutely not. You two made incredibly good points that this one line. Oh, heck. I'm turning my H2 back black just so we can experiment with this and just we can see what the selector does. Collaboration. These are all really, really good answers. So it is, and I know I've said technically correct is the best kind of correct, but technically correct can also kind of trip you up, can't it, my loves? It's easier to spot errors. The structure is more readable. We space it out like this for humans. We're a little. I was going to say we're more valuable than computers. We're valuable in different ways. So I want to prove to you that the selector. We've only got one H2 on our page right now, and I want to prove to you that CSS is going to change all of our H2s. And I can't really do that effectively if there's just one. Y'all won't believe me. So let's go ahead and create some new ones. I know I'm going to have to delete these to pass the test. That's fine. So here it's saying, hey, you can create a selector by telling me the type of element and then setting the color. And please note, we're in our little curly braces. We don't need quotation marks for this. We would use those for the inline because we're setting an attribute. But here we can just say, and what color should I make it? I want to make it pink. We wouldn't leave this pink. It's not very human readable. But something that's so important, something we must do, even though it works without it most of the time, is put this semicolon here. And that doesn't really change things for us, but that means if we add other things to our HTML, other rules, because we could do more. I'm getting way ahead of us. We could do way more. I could change the size. I could change the font. I could probably make it blink. I'd have to look it up, but we're not going to do that quite yet. We're just focusing on color. And we can use after my own heart. Thank you. Developer experience trumps computer value for the metrics of work. And this is a really useful axiom. And this is saying, hey, sometimes we do things that are more helpful for humans than they are for the computers. And you know what? It's more important. And when we had that talk from Bruce the other day about the web, and you all, please fuss at me if I'm getting this wrong. So last Wednesday, Bruce came to talk to us, and there was the agreement. It said, well, when we talk about the web, our first priority needs to be users, and then it's developers, and then it's browser makers, and then it's developer standards boards. Then the last priority is, thank you, Learn. And you just saw me like looking out into the distance. So we care in this order when we make standards. And I think about the web in general. We care about the users of our website, then developers. Then we care about the people who make the browsers because, they're in charge of some stuff. Then we care about standards folks. Then we care about the beauty of a standard or the elegance. Yeah. Oh, is browser makers last? I'm rubbish. Thank you. I'm pretty reliably rubbish. So finally, be sure to add a semicolon to each of your element rules. We're going to delete our H2 style element. We've already done that. And we're going to add the necessary CSS to turn all of our H2 elements blue. Yeah. You know what? I think we're only supposed to have one H2 element. So I added these just to prove to you, just in case you had any doubt in your heart, that setting a selector will change all of them. If we wanted to, we could change all of our list items. We could do lots of cool things with CSS selectors. And as we go, we're going to go ahead and learn about different sort of levels of granularity. This is going to change all of our H2. What if I don't want to change them all? Yeah. Last is the fun police. Indeed, as the fun police, I should be your last concern. So HTML classes are really, really useful. So we've just learned that a selector is saying, hey, I think I want all of my P elements, or I want all of my H2 elements to follow this rule. But what if I want to set a rule for some of my P elements and all of my H2 elements? So an HTML class is like creating a club or putting all of these targeted elements in a class. Think about, oh, these are all the elements that are going to after school tutoring to learn about how to be pink, or to learn about how to be small, or to learn about how to have this specific font. It's really setting us not very secret, but setting a club and then setting the rules for the club. So let's look at how to declare a CSS class. And we're going to come in our style blocks before, because this is where our CSS file lives conceptually. We've already got our selector here. And when you set a selector, or when you create a class, you're declaring it. And we're going to declare a class here. And I really like the idea of declaring a class, because you're just saying out loud, or really typey, hey, I want this rule to exist. And that always feels a little bit like magic, doesn't it? Hi, I want to say these words. And some of these are sort of gently obscured words, blue text. They're words, but they're a little bit weird. I want to say this thing that feels a little bit like a magic spell, and then it's going to happen. How exciting. So we're going to just follow the example. All of our CSS, and let's space this out just a little bit so we can get a little breathing room, just for human readability. Here, whenever we start a class, whenever we're going to put everybody in a club together, we start with a full stop. You say, why? And I say, oh, there's a very good reason for that. Just because. Oh, fab. We haven't talked about this. We haven't talked about style group tag element goes early yet. We're going to go ahead and let's talk about that now, shall we? That's a very, very good point. And do you know what? I'm so lazy and so dreadful. Keeping in mind that right now, style is a block in our HTML element. And we know that our browsers read HTML files from the top down. Why, and I'm going to make y'all yell at me, why have we put our style block at the top? And here's a little bit of a spoiler. Why couldn't? And instead of saying, oh, could we put it at the bottom? I'm going to go ahead and say, I don't think we can put this at the bottom. Why can't we put the rules for styling our HTML elements at the bottom? Why do we need that to be at the top before any of our H2 elements? So what we're going to do here is say, well, I want to try and create a class called blue text. So I'm going to, and don't worry if you forget the syntax all the time. Yeah. So we've got a really good point here. Just saying, well, so it'll apply them to our elements, and that's perfect. So because your browser's reading an HTML file from the top down, yeah, learning. You are at Monica's HTML reads top to bottom, because so the computer, or here the browser really, yeah, reads it all top to bottom. And you say, well, if I'm setting a rule for what I want you to do to my H2s, this is correctly, absolutely right. You're going to need your rule before you see your H2 if you want to set this rule against it. You all are absolutely fantastic at this. So here, if I want to create a class, I say, well, I want the color blue. And we put that semicolon because we're great. I've got this, I'm just copying our example. Ooh. Felix makes such a fantastic point, and I want to examine this. We can put him at the bottom, but it'll do it in a weird, janky way. So it'll sort of, and oftentimes this will be so fast that you can't really. It depends on your connection. So it'll load your HTML, and then it'll get to the bottom and say, hey, you know what? I've just seen that you had all these CSS rules. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and hurry up and do those. And you'll see like a little blink where your page will go away and come back a little bit styled. So it is absolutely even more than technically correct. Completely correct. It will technically work, but it'll work in a weird way. And you want this to look beautiful from the beginning. And for folks who are on kind of a rubbish connection, you don't want them to be like, oh wait, hang on, we've got to redo this with the CSS is really energy efficient. Oh, Felis, look at your. I'm gonna bully you. I'm gonna like boss you about and make you come on one of these streams one day. And mean as I am, I'm not actually gonna make you. Everything's fine. So we've learned, hey, we can create a class that says blue text. And we said, well, Jess, you did that, but nothing has changed. So what was the deal? I said, well, I haven't set any classes. So remember when we created IDs in HTML and we did some stuff with it? Here I've said, hey, I'm creating a class. Is there an order you have to add style rules to the style block? Must be an element, a class ID, or a different order, or jumble up. Y'all just ask the Bex questions all the time. So there's generally a convention of order within a project. So I might put all of my selectors first, and then all of my classes, and then all of my IDs. And that's not going to change the order in which CSS applies them. That is going to change the order in which I, as a human, am able to go through and parse them. And that's just the way I might do it. If you're on a project that says your IDs first and then you can do that. Like lots of folks will have style guides for the way you write CSS. But the order in which these are applied, so say, if I've got two conflicting ones, if I've set two different rules, if I've set a selector and I've set a class, and they both apply to the same element, which is going to win in that fight? And as we go, we're going to be talking about that. And we're going to be talking about that kind of in Pokemon terms, if that's not weird, because there is absolutely a series of more powerful and less powerful ways to set things in CSS. And just to give you a spoiler, if I remember correctly, and I rarely do, a class is almost always going to overrule a selector. And if I recall correctly, and I almost never do, an ID is going to overrule almost everything else. So these things, it's not a democracy in CSS. Some of these are queens and some of them are just princesses, and the queen can tell the princess what to do. Sorry, I've mixed my metaphors. I'm talking about royalty and Pokemon at the same time. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be so much fun. So we've created a CSS class called blue text, but then we want to apply it to something. I want to go ahead and apply it to this. Shall we apply it to this paragraph to see what it feels like? Here, I'm going to add the class HTML element as an attribute. Here, I'm going to set the class to blue. And as soon as I do this, blue text. And as soon as I've done that, we see that the blue text up here has indeed, as we requested, turned blue. And we talked a little bit about there's no Pokemon spoiler. Really, what I'm going to be talking about in overruling and in inheritance in CSS, I'm going to be talking about Pichu, which is a little baby Pikachu. I'm going to be talking about Pikachu, which is a Pikachu, and Raichu, which is a big boss Pikachu. So very, very, these are like season 1, we're fine. And priorities can change with the use of an important declaration. And that's going to be adding some deep chaos, isn't it? It's not. It just sounds scarier than it is right now. Everything's going to be fine. Remember when we learned about IDs in HTML? Because right now, our class is called blue text. And when we learned about IDs in HTML, we had an example of an ID called footer. And that footer ID was applied to the footer element. And if you remember, we experimented with that a little bit and said, hey, what happens if we call this ID banana? Does it still work? And we're like, well, yeah, it still works. It's just less human readable. What do you think will happen if I change this? If I change our class to say, call our class Pikachu. And because I've changed this, it says, well, I made this class is called Pikachu. Immediately it stops working. And it stops working because here I've set this attribute to the class of blue text. And my browser's come down and it said, I want all of our H2s to be blue. I can do that for you. Cool. Whenever I see a class called Pikachu, I'm going to set that to blue as well. I've got you. I've got your back on this. And then it says, hey, I want to set the class of blue text. My browser goes, cool, let me just go back to my CSS. I've never seen a class called blue text. I'm just not going to set it. This is what you get, and you get the default. But if we call it Pikachu, it becomes blue text. That gets very, I've just said blue text so many times that it doesn't mean anything. Why might we want to call this text blue class instead of Pikachu? Y'all are going to say my favorite words. So inside our style element, change the H2 selector to red text. So we're not even going to put up a class in our paragraph tag. Let's take that away. So we're going to create, and let's go ahead and do this from the start, just so we feel this again. This is very spiritual, isn't it? Oh, I want you to really deeply feel the CSS-ness of the CSS. And I say, well, I want to create a class called red text. And I've got to have these little hyphens because we can't put spaces in CSS classes. We're chill with that. Oh, heck, I'm wrong. We need our curly braces here. And here I want to say, you know what? Anytime you see this class of red text, could you please? And that's really the relationship we're having with it, isn't it? Am I setting this right? Yeah. Everything's fine. Color, yeah. And the color is going to be equal to red, semicolon, all the time. So we're very responsible. Visual, what? Oh, this is such a good question. So the kinds we're going to be learning in the next couple of days are, so the selectors. Selectors are a really specific thing. Selectors mean I want to select all of the HTML elements with this type. And I think what you might be trying to ask here are, what are the different ways, what are the different methods through which we can assign rules as a group or to individuals using CSS? And the ones we're going to be learning together are selectors. Oh, heck. Then we're learning about classes right now. We're going to be learning about ID. And we did have a really good point that we're going to be learning about important as an override. So class ID, Felis, as always, points out that tag is going to be important eventually as well. So we're just going to go ahead and chill. These will reveal themselves in time. And you know what? I'm chuckling at this because I'm a bad person, but these are going to continue to feel weird. The more we use them, the less weird they're going to feel. And I am 100,000 years old and ageless and deathless, and I've been messing with CSS for 50,000 years, and I still have to look stuff up all the time. It's fine. I mean, it's miserable, but fine. We've set our red text. Yeah, MDN's a really good place to check this out. We've created the class called red text, but nothing has happened yet. While I'm making something happen, fuss at me about why this hasn't happened. So, we had a really good question a little while ago about, well, when we've got two different things, when we've got two different rules set on the same element, what happens when those crash? What happens when there's a conflict? And we're going to take a look at those now. We're going to get to talk about Pokemon right now. Yeah. Or royalty, whatever's more accessible to you. We say, you know what, RH2, it all Ramon, you make a great point. There's a really good CSS diner game, which I really recommend. So RH2 is blue right now because we've got a selector set for it. Say, hey, whenever you see an H2, make it blue. And we're gonna try to confuse CSS, and we're gonna say, hey, you already have a rule applied to this. I want to apply another rule. I'm going to apply this class. What do you think? Eggroll, you make a great point. Effectively, right now, my job is messing up HTML and CSS. I am professionally terrible at this, and it's very relaxing to be professionally terrible. One of the cool things, oh gosh, can I tell you? One of the most powerful things you can do in programming is get to be really laid back about looking silly. we're going to learn HTML and CSS and design and accessibility, but we're not going to learn all of it. Um, and you're always going, and you, I know people who are amazing, fantastic. They're at the top of their game. They've written a book, and they'll ask a really basic question, just like, "Oh, I've forgotten." Professionally excellent at messing things up will be the goal, won't it? But if you get to a point where you're like, you know what? I'm gonna mess things up. I'm gonna forget embarrassing thing. And it shouldn't be embarrassing, but things that feel embarrassingly simple. I'm gonna forget them all the time and have to look them up. If you can get to a point where you're really, really chill about that, it's like a superpower. Nobody can laugh at you for like, oh, you forgot to put a full stop before your CSS class. If you are preemptively chill about being a goofball, it makes you bulletproof. Not actually bulletproof. Please don't. Please don't. But psychologically, gently bulletproof in exactly one space. So get your bets in. What happens? Your computer will shout at you, but you're the boss of your computer. So we're going to set our CSS class to red. And what's going to happen, my loves? Ooh. So if we think of selectors as a Pichu, like a little tiny little baby Pokemon, I want you to think of our classes as a Pikachu. You know what? A Pikachu can boss around a Pichu. So a class can boss around a selector. Or, royalty always gets so messy. If an H2 is a duchess, I don't know how fancy a duchess is. I'm rubbish. That's probably why they don't let me be British. I'm sure there's a test somewhere where they're like, how fancy is a duchess? And I'm like, oh, wow, medium fancy. But if an H2 is a duchess, a class is a princess. And the princess can come and say, hey, duchess, I'm going to boss you about a bit. So we have overridden our selector rule using a class. And I think if we run our tests, I think this is going to be fine. Don't worry if this feels weird. This is weird. Cool. Platypus makes a really, really compelling historical point. CSS used to not exist. And if you remember a time before CSS, that means you were building websites with me back in the 90s. But it used to be that we would have to dump all of this stuff into our HTML. And do you know what? If this looks like a mysterious secret code where it says font colors equals, and then we've got the hash, we're going to learn how to do those in a bit. Just to go ahead and preview, this free bootcamp is based on the free Code Camp curriculum. We're working from them, but we're not free Code Camp. You never have to pay us money, and you don't have to pay free Code Camp money. It's in the name, it's free. But they are a nonprofit. If you're comfortably employed, and if you can, chucking them $5 a month is a nice thing to do. This is my class one on my personal free Code Camp account. I promise, pay them $5 a month. I promise. I should try and send them more. They're just sweethearts. We're going to style multiple elements with the CSS class. And we talked about this a little bit. We said, hey, setting a CSS class is like making a club. And then you make a club, you make the rules for the club, and then you invite these individual elements to be part of your club with the rules by attaching that class as an attribute in your CSS element or your HTML element. So not only am I bad at CSS, I'm a bad teacher. You all are just loved. What we're going to do is we've already got our class. We're not going to write it again. We've got a class of RedText that exists, and we're going to apply it to our H2 element and our first P element. So about 90% of this is done. We have a CSS class written for us, and the format for this feels okay. Yeah, it is a class win, eh? So we've got our full stop. We've got the name of our class. We've got the rules we want to set. This feels all right. And it's already set for our H2. So do you know what? What do programmers love almost as much as deleting stuff? We love And when I say we, don't forget that if you are writing HTML and you're writing CSS, I don't care if it's a tutorial environment, you are a web developer. You better call yourself a web developer. And anybody who tries to tell you you're not, you come and get me. I will get on I gave up internet arguments a couple years ago, but I will absolutely come and fight anybody for you. Not physically. I'm an old woman. So our class, we're going to set this to RedText as well. And I'm going to bet you imaginary internet money. That's the same thing. So we've written one class, but here we've got it applied to two elements. And this is really the flexibility and power of classes. Oh, Ola is pointing out something that is after my own heart. If you are here, you are a web developer. Everything's fine. And when I say everything's fine, I know the world is big and scary, but for the next hour or so, everything's going to be mostly okay. We're going to go a little bit faster just to see if we can pick up a little bit more of this. So, font size is controlled by the font size CSS property. And I'm going to be a little mysterious. What is a CSS property? So please shout at me in chat and tell me one of two things. Tell me, what do you think a CSS property might be? And what CSS property have we already learned? Yeah. While you all are yelling at me, I'm going to go ahead and get this sorted. So inside the same style tag, we're staying here, that contains our RedText class, we're going to set, same style class, create an entry for P elements and set the font size to 16 pixels. You know what? There's a lot going on here. And there's a lot going on here in kind of programmery language, right? So, do you know what? This is such a good question. And you know what? Please, please, please always ask this. I know that learning something in your second or third or fourth language is so hard. What's the difference between an attribute and a property here? So here, when we talk about CSS properties, these are pre-existing commands that exist within CSS. So these are preset commands that you need to learn. Whereas an attribute, these are anything that you can apply. So some of your attributes are going to be things, are preset, preset, how do I say this without saying? Keywords. Keywords is a way to say this. And Matchstore, if you're a Spanish language native speaker, I might lovingly bully Ola to translate this. I'm so mean. Look at the folks showing up. So a property is a preset keyword. It's a list of keywords. Your Croatian. Dobre den, my lovely. I'm so sorry that Dobre den is exactly all of the Croatian I speak, and that's not even very good, is it? I hope the weather's lovely in Croatia right now, and I'm so sorry that I can't offer you better Croatian support. So think of properties as the preset, like the preset magical spells, the preset keywords in CSS that you can go ahead and invoke. So I say color. That is a pre-existing keyword that CSS recognizes. Whereas an attribute is kind of the same vibe in HTML. These are the different things that we can apply to an element to change it. Vishwa, you make the most beautiful point here. And I want to go ahead. Attributes tell us about it. These are things that we apply to an element, that we stick to them. But examples of attributes and properties respectively, let's go ahead, because sometimes a property can be an attribute. Let's go ahead and continue to do those. And I'm going to call out the properties as I create them and the attributes. Felis points out, you know what? When you create a property, when you create a class, when you add a property to a class or a tag or an ID in CSS, it's a property. And when you apply that, when you take it and say, hey, this class, when you put class in an HTML, hang on, I got you. This is a class. Cool, cool, cool. This color is a property of the class. This is one of the pre-established keywords that CSS knows what it does. And here, even though this is our class within CSS, When I say class here, this is um, an attribute. This is setting it as a property. This is going to feel weird. We're just going to continue to reuse these words until they feel less weird. Yeah. I'm so sorry. That's a terrible explanation to say, well, let's talk through this. Let's touch on this. Let's talk about the concept of sort of properties as pre-established keywords. But really at the end of the day, this is just going to feel super weird until it feels less. And I hate giving that advice. Ooh, you'll understand when you're older in web developer terms. But this will feel less weird the less we do it. The more we do it. So we've got a bunch of web developer words, and this feels kind of like a word puzzle here, doesn't it? So this is asking us to do some things. So it says, okay, inside the same style tag that contains our RedText class. Let's stop there. Let's place an artificial stop there. And with that saying, say, hey, we're going to be inside here. It's got to be the same one where your red text lives. And I think this is strongly implying that it's not going to be part of my red text. And what else is going to happen here is it's saying create an entry for all of the paragraph elements. And I think we could do this in two different ways. I'm going to go down and check our test requirements. But while I do this, what two ways could I set a rule for my P elements? Oh gosh, it's not giving me any guidance here. So I know there's at least two ways, but two ways that we've learned so far to set all of our P elements or some of our P elements to a specific size or a specific color. And I'm going to do this as a selector. What's the difference between a selector and a class? That's the real question. Tell me what the difference between font size, no. So property is always an attribute. So a property, when it's being applied to an HTML element, is an attribute of that HTML element. A property is something that belongs to a CSS rule, and an attribute is sticking it to your HTML element. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. It doesn't in my head. So what's the difference between a selector and a class? Font size. Yeah, property can be applied to perfect. So a class can be applied to or property can be applied. So class or an ID can be easily applied to a single element or more than one element, where selector just applies to every one of our specified elements. So here, when we say, here's a selector, wait, add a space just for human read. We're saying, you know what, this is going to apply to all of our paragraphs. We're going to set this to 16. And we're going to set this to 16 pixels. And right now, setting it to pixels doesn't really make a difference. But we're going to learn the difference between pixels, which are a fixed size. I mean, they're a little tiny. Pixels are a fixed measurement, like inches or centimeters or light years. Whereas later we'll learn about an M, which is a relative. Say, hey, relative to these other things on your page, I want it to be this size. So just to go ahead and review, a class can be applied to one or many different HTML elements on your page, different characters in your HTML page. So does P have a set pixel height? Oh, that's a good. What is the default height? You know what? What is the default pixel for no, I don't want that. Please give this to me in DuckDuckGo. So whenever we don't know something, what do? unless it will put us off track, we look it up. What is the default? Oh, what is the definition of love? What is the default pixel size p element? Hmm. Hmm. CSS, different units for expressing length. Da 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 da. Da. I mean, I don't refuse to use Google. I just really like DuckDuckGo. Do you know what? I confess that I do not know what the default size is. And this first thing I've checked hasn't immediately told me. Um, this is something where, and I'm going to go and look this up later. But if somebody else wants to be looking this up while I'm doing this, I want to make sure I get through these CSS lessons. I confess I don't know. You know what? Is it 60? Oh, I have to do this all over again because I'm rubbish. But it'll be faster this time. Another paragraph element. We know we want to set a font size. And tell me if this changes. When I say 16, does that change at all? Hmm. Is the default 60? The default is different per browser. See, this is why I bribe you to tag along and help, really to bail me out consistently. Now, in an authoritarian voice, I'll say, well, of course, you see, the default size for the paragraph tag, and really, I imagine that's my authoritarian voice, is different per browser, which I absolutely did not know. And I really I really appreciate you bailing me out. I would have just been like, I don't know, let's look it up, and waffled for 20 minutes. We've set our font size to 16, which may well be the default. What happens when I say, and whenever you don't see something change, get weird. Cool, that does work. It did indeed. But like, yeah, let's check this out. Oh, it only says two because I went away and came back. That's when incognito mode will get you, is diminishing returns on your completion rates. We're going to set a font family of an element. And this is also a property. This is another keyword that CSS already knows. And the more CSS you learn, the more of the common properties you'll learn, like color and font family and font size. You just sort of learn these properties by looking them up again and again and using them again and again. And it's super chill. So if we wanted to, oh gosh, you're absolutely right. You know what? Our device could make an impact on our I'm not sure our device choices will often oh, you know what? The settings on your individual devices can absolutely, you are right and I'm wrong. The settings on your devices can absolutely change your font size and different. Um, you know what? I think is the font size on my web browser slightly bigger? Maybe. I believe, and really, whenever somebody says, Jess, I think you're wrong, you should generally go with what they say. So we're going to learn about the font family property. And you know what? We're going to make all of our P elements a monospace font. Yeah, it's a group of fonts that's different. And this is really good. This makes a fantastic point. Felix is saying, hey, do you know what? Font family is a property you can set, but then you can set real specific fonts. So these are separate things. And this is sort of, yeah. So we're going to learn, we've already learned about setting colors and saying pink or blue or green. And later on, we're going to learn about much more specificity we can set with colors using hex codes, which is like a magic spell, isn't it? And the difference between font family and setting specific fonts feels similar. So font family is just sort of a big catch-all, whereas setting very specific fonts feels a lot like setting custom colors, doesn't it? So this is telling us, hey y'all, we want to set all of your P as the monospace ones. Of course, Chinese fonts are going to be supported. This is such a fantastic question. So the Unicode Consortium are So the same way we learned about W3C during Bruce's stream on Wednesday, the Unicode Consortium are the folks in charge of sort of character-based encoding on the web. And you know what? If they weren't backing up people, like if they say, "Oh, ha ha ha, you're just out of luck if you're using Chinese character," no, they'd be terrible at their job, wouldn't they? So we could create another selector. We could copy all of this and change that. But do you know what? We can put multiple rules within the same class or multiple rules within the same. And we're going to, why are we going to do that? Because I'm lazy and because it's more human readable. Lazy. Now we're going to set our font family to mono. Keep an eye on this because I think when I finish the word monospace, oh, mono, nothing. Oh gosh, you know what? As soon as I say mono, that makes me think that maybe mono by itself is enough of a keyword. Oh, mono, its own font family. The things we learn through experimentation. Even though it works without this, I'm still going to do this because if I want to add another rule using another property later on, I'm going to want to have that semicolon there ready to go. So here within the same selector, we've got two different rules. We're going to run these tests. Everything's fine. Everything's gonna be mostly fine. Well, that's a big promise. For the durability of this course, for the next what time is it? You know what? For the next hour, I got you. For the next hour, things are going to be mostly fine, I guess. I promise. Oof, I can't promise that these days. So, oh heck, let me just. We're going to import a font. And we just had somebody helpfully point out, like, oh, do you know what? Font families and fonts themselves are different. And if we've talked a little bit about files, how almost everything that you get on the web are different files being read by your browser, accepted and read by your browser. And fonts are files too. And you say, no, 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 Jess, you just changed your font and you didn't import a file or link to a file. What are you talking about? What's your font family uses the very, very basic fonts that are built into your system. So they live in your operatings. They're on your phone or they're on your computer or they're on your, do people still surf on an Xbox? Is that still a thing? They're on your like knock, knock, knock machine that you're using. But fonts are, I like, this is a big rabbit hole you can go down on your own if you want to. Fonts are art. People make fonts. Yeah, a font family is a family of fonts that look similar. This is perfect point from Platypus. And we're going to import a font saying, you know what, we want a specific font. We want a font somebody's made. We want that whole file. And we're going to specify non-standard. So it means those ones that aren't already built in to your machine. Custom web fonts to use on your website. And you can get these from a bunch of places. You can host your own. So you can save the font as a file in your hosting and use that. But Google makes some of these publicly available. So we're going to import a font by linking to it. And you say, well, we've learned about links. We're going to use a and our. Well, I say, well, this is different. We're going to say link here because this is a very, very different vibe. We're going to put this before. And do you know what? I'm just going to copy and paste this because I'm dreadfully lazy. I'm going to talk to you about the different elements of this. And then I'm going to chill out and get a little bit of water because the question I want to put to you is, this has told me you're going to link to the font. We're going to import. We're going to import it by linking to it. Yep. Velas makes a fantastic point. Link here means creating a link between the HTML document and the other file. So it's not like an anchor tag. It's not like your user is going to follow this. This is connecting it like links in a chain to this resource somewhere else on the web. Why? And this is really to do this, copy the following code snippet and paste it into the top of your code editor before the opening style element. Can you tell me why I have to put this before my CSS? Jinx, we can talk about this in a minute. So what are some good points? So Google Fonts is one of the easiest places to do this. I might search for and hop on DuckDuckGo, hop on Google, hop on Bing, hop on Yahoo. I am a equal opportunity search engine user. And just search, where are good free web fonts to use online? Why do I have to link to this first before I can use it in my CSS? I'm gonna grab some water. See, all the very, very important things in programming are have some water and read the license. We talked about this in the Saturday social session, talking about open source licenses a little bit. And we talked about this when we talked about images and hot linking, how Creative Commons licenses are often more permissive. Sometimes you can use them with permit, but you still can't hot link because it's rude. But why do I have to put this link before I can use it in my CSS? So once I do that, I can say the font family, and I can add the way we do this is we change font family. We say, what is the family name? And that's our specific font we want to use. And then the generic name. We don't have to have a generic name, but that's a fallback. So if I say I want to use lobster, and then I want to use monospace as my backup, what it means is that my CSS will see this link and say, hey, go and get this font. And then later on when I apply it, it'll say, hey, use this font I've had you go and get. But if you can't find it, use this backup. And the backup are going to be your system fonts generally. So family names are case sensitive and they need to be wrapped in quotes if there's a space in the name. So Open Sans would need to have a quote because it's got a space, but you don't have to do it for lobster. But do not, import the lobster font to your web page. And we've done that here. And we've added this link before our CSS because our CSS needs to have this resource loaded in order to be using it smoothly and efficiently. Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely fantastic, Tanya. HTML reads top to bottom. And generally, you need to have a tool before you can use the tool. Google Fonts. Oh, what's the issue, my love? Google. Oh, you've gone away again. Sorry, that's my fault. In Google Fonts, you can't figure out what info to include. Let's go ahead and let's look at that together. That's super chill. So your opening code snippet needs to start with a link. And then you need to have your href, your hypertext reference. Then a quotation mark. And then you need to go ahead and link to where that link is. So what's the URL of that specific font? And that's going to be within fonts.google.com. If you come to this one where it says fonts.google APIs, API is it's a specific type of communication protocol that computers like to use. And we're to talk about those if we're able to come back and do a JavaScript module. But they're not usually very human friendly. So going to the human website, which is, where is that again? It's, fonts.google.com is probably going to be a little friendlier than coming to this API one. We think that's the sort of service for computers. So we're going to import the lobster font onto our webpage. And we did that by copying and pasting because we're not, I mean, you all are not, but I'm very lazy. And what we're going to do is say, we've got our font family monospace. And I think we're going to leave that as our backup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add lobster you know what? Is it a semi? Ooh, look at that. And you say, okay, as soon as I said lobster, it turned it into lobster, which is this very, very fancy one. And I want to look at this fallback. So we've learned to do font family, the name of the font we've imported, and then the generic name as a fallback. And I want to show you really briefly why we want the generic name to exist. I'm going to Control X. I'm going to cut. And now what's going on is we say, well, we're going to start our CSS. Here's our red class. Here's what I want you to do with the paragraph. So we say, make the font size 16 pixels. And CSS is like, yeah, I got you. We're cool. And I say, set the font family to lobster. And CSS is like, well, I mean, I don't, you didn't give me lobster. So and I said, well, if I haven't given you lobster, please use monospace instead. Ooh. Will a user with a different PC read the unique font displayed in the website for which the font is not? Oh, cool. So you don't have to have the fonts installed in your system in order to have them work. So the generic ones, stuff like Mono or Monospace or Sans Serif, those are going to be built into anybody's system. Those are on everyone's operating systems. You don't have to worry about those. But you're able to link to Lobster here because you're able to use Lobster here because you've linked to it, because you've imported it. So it's not going onto someone's computer. It's not being saved to their operating system. It's just imported here for this specific website. So it exists in their browser because you've asked them to bring it over. That feels weird. I'm sorry. We're going to run all tests. Oh no. Oh no. I'm rubbish. I am absolutely Do you know what? Look at this running test. You know what, Jess? Yes. You did this wrong. I read exactly half of the requirements. And look, import the lobster font to your website. Yeah, we did that. And then use an element selector to set lobster as the font family for your H2 element. I'm rubbish. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. Oop, heck. So we still want that to be monospace. Hang on just a second. We've got a really good question, and I wanna look at that with you. But if you give me a second, let's go ahead and do this first, and I'll get to you. So we're going to set an H2 selector, which means all of our H2s, of which we have one. And say, well, you know what? I want our font family to be lobster. Why is lobster capitalized? Because it is case sensitive, which means if I say lobster, oh, I thought that wouldn't work. Lobster doesn't do anything. Oh, lowercase lobster. Okay, so it works, but still go ahead and use the right ones. Font family lobster, and we're going to use monospace as just a fallback. We're not even required to have a fallback here, but if we run all tests, wait, what? You should use only an H2 element selected to change the font. I did. Oh, are you trying to say that you don't want the paragraph? Hmm. Control Z, undo. All right. So, font family. So monospace here. You know what? I think maybe it doesn't want me to have this fallback. Yeah? Okay. Even that feels like a cheat where it said, hey, you can use this as a fallback. And we used it as a fallback and it said, ha ha ha, not going to let you pass. Okay. So would this be considered metadata or fall somewhere else in a full page? So let's talk about what is metadata and what do we do when we don't know the answer to a question? Yeah. So metadata, I've looked up because I well, like the Oxford Dictionary defines metadata as a set of data that gives information about other data. So metadata is information about information. Oh gosh, you know what? I did have a semicolon after lobster, so the mono. Oh, you're right. Data about data. So the question is oh no, this is getting philosophical. Is an imported font data about data, or is it just data? Hmm. I think it's just data. But if you came to me in a coffee shop or in a pub and you said, Jess, I'm not sure why you would make that popping sound. I think that's just the let's start a weird coffee shop conversation. You said, came up to me in a coffee shop. You said, Jess, I've got an impassioned argument about why data, Felix. So the imported font is data. The link is metadata. I don't have strong opinions on that. And that sounds right. Um, yeah, all right. This is not me doubting you. This is not me saying, oh, maybe. Like, I don't have a firm opinion. It feels gently philosophical. And I would lovingly believe both. An impassioned argument that this is metadata or an impassioned argument that this is data. A lot of people in computing will say, oh, this thing is absolutely correct and I'm absolutely right. And yet, and I think a lot of times, and I could be wrong about philosophy as well, but I think a lot of times what we're talking about is a lot more philosophical, isn't it? Yeah. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to specify how our font should degrade. And they taught us this last time and we tried to use it and we got like bopped on the nose for it. And now it says, cool, I want you to set a backup. And I said, I did it last time. Okay. So there are several default fonts available in all browsers. So you can use these generic font families will always have your back. I always say always. You can find an edge case, I bet. Oh, can we talk about what an edge case is? An edge case is one of those knife edge, very, very specific exceptions. If I'm telling you, hi, you can use monospace and everyone's device will be able to use it. You say, Jess, I booted up my old Apple IIe and I actually loaded this up and it didn't load monospace correctly. And I'm not sure, I don't remember if Apple IIe did mono. And for those, it just occurred to me that almost all of you will have never seen it. They were these big clunky gray computers. You got them in like primary schools in the States back in the 80s and early. Oh no, I'm so old. But you say, oh, I use this ancient computer, or I viewed this on my Game Boy, and sans serif didn't work. And that's going to be an edge case to say, well, when I say this always works, I mean 99, 98% of the time. Yeah. Apple IIe points out it's not gonna know what CSS is. It will have no love in your heart for the modern web. It's gonna fall back on just HTML stuff. It will still mostly render the page, which is bizarre and terrifying to me. If you remember from our Wednesday session, um, Bruce showed us, oh, here's what happens if I use the first web browser to look at a modern web page. And it like sort of mostly worked. So we're going to, several default fonts are available. These generic families have monospace, serif, and sans serif. When one font isn't available, you could tell the browser to degrade to another font. And I tried to put a semicolon last time, which was absolutely wrong. We do that with a comma. Generic font family names are not case sensitive, and they don't need quotes because they're CSS keywords. Now remember, keywords just means these are words that CSS recognizes out of the box. If I say, it's like when you teach a dog, I don't want to, it's like when you teach a dog a command, you say, oh, Fido, sit. Your dog is like, I know what sit means. Let's do this. Or when you teach a cat a trick and a cat goes, well, I know what sit means. I'm just not going to do it. Keywords like properties are keywords, are words that CSS knows the meaning of. Their tricks that CSS already knows how to do. So we're going to apply the monospace font to the H2 element, like I tried to do last time, but I did a bad job. So now it's got 2 fonts. Now we're going to comment out. And remember, we can use comments to leave ourselves. Oh, heck. We can write comments to leave ourselves notes, or we can write comments to temporarily get rid of some code without deleting it. Say, well, I want you to get rid of this code for now, but I might need it later. Let's go ahead and so here, got this is commented. So we see that our H2 has defaulted to monospace. Our browsers come and said, I do not see this. This is commented out. I refuse to see it. I refuse to engage with this foolishness. But I do see that you've got a CSS code block here. I see that we've got some rules about a RedText class. I'd be happy to do that. I see that you've got a selector for H2. When I see your H2, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And when it sees this H2, it says, fabulous. I'm going to start applying these rules you've given me. You've told me to make this the font family of Lobster. I'd be delighted. I don't have Lobster. Oh, you know what? It's fine. You've also told me if I don't have Lobster to use monospace. I'll give you monospace. Let's do that instead. Let's go ahead and, oh, you know what? Who asked this question earlier? Let me find that. Someone asked this question, and it was a really good question. And where's a question about this being on my computer? Oh, no, we've gone back to people being Croatian, which is cool. I'm jealous. It better be sunny out there. If one of my beautiful assistants sees this before me, someone was asking a question about what happens if what happens if, and it was somebody who was very, very smart and interesting. So me forgetting who asked this makes it even more cruel. And I said, well, what happens when this is saved to your computer? Oh, Beryl, you're an absolute love. Thank you. And thank you very much, Mervyn. I bet that was you saving me from myself. And you said, what happens if I have this saved on my computer already? And here's an important note. And I said, well, don't really worry about that because we're going to be importing that. It doesn't matter if you have it on your computer or not. But one thing that's really exciting is if you do have the Lobster font installed on your computer, it means that it will serve the version of Lobster it has available. So if your user has a device that has more fonts saved, more fonts enabled on their individual machine or on their individual operating system, the difference between machine and operating system is important, but one it's philosophical, isn't it? And it just means, hey, if your user has this saved, it means that if your import of this font breaks, they'll still be able to see it. That's a little bit magical. Beryl, thank you so much for asking a very astute question. This says 9%. I think we're probably like 40, so it's all chill. How far are we? We're not that far at all. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. So we're going to size our images. CSS has a property called width that controls an element's width. We're going to go ahead and say, we can set it to an image as well. We say, well, I want to set a specific width for my image. I want to make it wider. We're going to create a class called smaller image. And we're going to do this a little bit quickly. I think that this is probably going to make our images smaller. And we're going to set our width to, we're just going to set it to 100 pixels. Just a little tiny strip of a thing. And you might notice, you said, well, Jess, nothing has changed? I said, yeah, nothing has changed yet. Because we really have 2 parts to this. And it says, create a class called smaller image. We've done that. And use it to resize the image so it's only 100 pixels wide. We've set the width. Ooh, do you know what? Look how rubbish I am. Pixels. By default, it's going to use pixels, but you always want to go ahead and specify because it's the right thing to do. And I think what we're going to need to do, I think if we run all tests, we're not boop, boop. Our image element should have the class smaller image. We're going to come down to where our image lives. And this is a little bit of a fun one because our image lives inside our link. And I think we can specify this. There's a part of you internally screaming about this. I know it's all such a mess. It makes more sense as you go. Felix, can you explain why you're internally screaming? If it's not a this has resized our image for us. And Felix is sort of previewing that, you know what? Best practices wise, this is very probably not how you would actually do this. Image size is controlled by the file. Yeah. You would probably, if you wanted to make this smaller, I'd make the image file itself smaller. That's going to give your users less information they have to download, less they have to get from your server or your host, which is the same thing in a weird way. Resizing it like this doesn't really do people a lot of favors. It's weird, but we do weird things when we're learning. CSS borders. We can draw a border around things. Isn't this nice? Style and color and width. For example, we wanted to set a red 5-pixel border around an HTML element. We could just, I'm going to copy and paste this because I'm rubbish. I'm not. Copying and pasting is wonderful. Copy and paste this, and it doesn't do anything. But then if I wanted to apply this to, you know what? It would look so weird. Can I set, you know what? It's a really basic thing, but how do I set more than one class? Is it, can I do a comma? But I can't. Space between. Do after my own. I had a comma and that's wrong. Hey, so I've got 2 classes right here, and this is drawn. And it's not very thin, is it? It's drawn a 5-pixel red solid border around my element. And this, I think this is really, really useful. When we talked about HTML, I talked to you about how HTML elements are kind of conceptually. Did we talk about how HTML elements are kind of like a bunch of weird rectangles? Maybe I think we might talk about that in CS. It's going to sound weird. Please believe me. But HTML elements are all kind of weird rectangles. And if you want to see, if you want to see the weird rectangle, yeah, y'all are saying, come on, don't use the comma, that won't work. And you're absolutely right. If you want to see the weird rectangle nature of an HTML element, draw a border around it using CSS. We're going to create a class. We're going to mercilessly get rid of this one. To pass this one, we're going, and I know we're moving real fast. I'm so sorry, loves. We're going to create a class called thick green. Do you know what? One thing I've been meaning to ask for a while is, how do we feel about the cadence of these lessons? Do we like having, and this isn't going to change for this boot camp, this is for future knowledge. Do we like doing one lesson a week live? Or would it be better? One thing I've been experimenting with in my head is, would we want to double the workload and do 2 lessons a week live? Or is that a lot for folks? Would you want to go faster? Would you want to go slower? Yeah, while I'm typing this out, fuss at me. And I do want to preview, we're probably going to stick with nice and slow for this one, just because we promised 12 weeks, and I don't want to lie to nobody. But you're thinking if we did JavaScript or if we did stuff in the future, you'd like to do it in 6 weeks. Oh, Alice, of course there's a way to watch previous streams. I'm going to ask my beautiful assistant to go ahead and chuck the link to, I think we've got a YouTube playlist. I'm not behind schedule. Go, I'm going. Thick green border, da-da-da-da-da. We're going to border color In my defense, I never said we were going to do all of these lessons. Our border color is going to be green, I bet. Thank you so much for asking. Hurry up. Our border width. How much is that? Is it 10? And our border style. Oh, heck. Oh, heck. It's going to be solid. And you say, oh, cool. That's done absolutely nothing, Jess. That doesn't do anything. Well, I am a school teacher. I used to be. I'm such a meanie. I'm going to come all the way down. I'm going to come all the way down. Woof. I'm going to come all the way down to where our image lived. And we've already got the class of smaller image. And look at this. Even Free Code Camp is fussing at me to remember this. I did forget. Remember, you can add multiple classes to an element by using its class attribute, but separate them by a space. So thank you so much for whoever pointed that out. And now we're going to apply. Where's my brain? Where was my brain? Woof. Thick green. And I think as soon as I put that R on the board, we got our thick green border. Run all tests. We're going to zip along. We're going to smooth those out. And a border radius is another CSS property. And that's how flexy, how smooth, how much we want to stretch these borders. And this is a weird concept. It's not going to make any sense for a long time. And to me, it still doesn't make any sense. So just experiment with these until they feel less weird. For me, that will be never. But don't get you can get by just fine with things feeling weird. I say living in 2021. So we're going to set the border radius to 10 pixels. And are you not going to do it until I say pixel? Yeah. We just got a very, very subtle roundy bit. What happens if I say 100? Oh, heck, I got a circle. But we just want that very gentle little flex. The bigger the border radius, the more circly it is. Felis after my own heart. We're going to run these tests. Everything's fine. Hey, some spoilers, isn't it? So we are going to make them circular. Again, you probably want to do this by editing your image, but it is possible to do this in CSS. We're going to change this to 50%. Hey, that's our image should have a border radius of 50%, making it perfectly circular. Oh, heck. 50%. 50%. This is why you read instructions better than I do. First, I said 50 pixels, and that was wrong. And then I said 50, and that doesn't do anything. 50%. So I want this 50% wobbly, which is fully circly. Very technical terms, wobbly and circly. We're going to keep going, and we're going to stop. Yeah, we're going to stop in about 15, 20 minutes and just make sure we answer everybody's questions. I'm going a little bit fast through this. We've got so much CSS, but I feel like we're going okay. Everything's fine. We are going to give some of our big conceptual rectangles a background color. So we're going to create a class called, why don't we merge the smaller image and the thick green border classes? And this is a really good point. So I want you to have a think about why. And in this project is nice and small. So that's something we could totally do in this project. Why, in a larger project, would we want to keep classes that do separate things separate? Yeah. So we say, well, we're just using each of those once. One to give a green border and one to make it circular. For this project, a project this size, merging them into green circle border or a similar class might make a lot of sense. But in a bigger project, saying, well, You know what? Sometimes I might want to add a border, and sometimes I might want to make it circular. And those aren't necessarily, oh, we've got that store saying, you know what? The granularity of use. Yeah. So both of you are beautifully correct at the same time. Eggroll is saying, hey, for a project this size, that should just be one class. I'm like, yeah, you're not wrong. And Magistore is saying, well, you know, in a big project, we'd want that we'd want to get weird, right? We want the flexibility to get, yeah, we'd want the flexibility to get weird. You're both perfect. Do you know what? We're going to create a class called Silver Background. And you know what? When I actually tried to do this when I made my first website when I was 13, it was not very good. And I was very disappointed with the silver color because, and you'll see what I mean. Wait a second. Background, color, property. Set that to, and let me know if you can understand why. We're not going to see anything yet, I bet. We're going to find our div element and set it to silver. But why do you think I was super remember, I was 13. I wasn't a very smart 13-year-old. Why was I disappointed by this being silver? Class equal to silver. Right, right. I mean, you all are grown-ups. You're not 13-year-olds. But somewhere in your heart, did you want that to be a reflective, like mirror-looking thing? No, it's just me. It's just me. So we've assigned this to our div element, further illustrating that it's just a big old rectangle, right? All of these HTML elements, all weird rectangles, mostly all weird. I mean, this is a weird circle, but like conceptually, all weird rectangles. So, are we excited? Are we excited? Everything, it's rectangles all the way down. We're going to set the ID of an element. And you're like, oh, Jess. I already know all about IDs. We use those in HTML. I say, yeah, damn right we did. Quite. We absolutely did. An HTML element can have an ID, and then we can select just that ID using CSS. And this is a good reason to keep your IDs unique. So if you want to change everything, use a select. Well, I mean, if you want to change all of its element type, use a selector. If you want to change a bunch of things that are all in the same club, use a class. If you've got one thing that's special, we use an ID to specify just that one thing. And we talked earlier about how this class can overrule a selector. So you say, if a selector is a Pichu, a class is a Pikachu. An ID is even more powerful. An ID will overrule a class. That's like a Raichu. That's like some cute electric mouse energy. So, an ID attribute should be unique. Browsers won't enforce this, but it's widely agreed upon as best practice. Yeah, an H2 selector is a tag selector. It selects all of those tags, all of those elements. It's a really, really good point. So an ID attribute should be unique. Your computer won't make you make it unique, but you know in your heart, you know it's the right thing to do. Here is a review, because we did this with HTML. Here's how we would give the H2 an ID of a cat photo app. And what we're going to do is we're going to just assign the ID at this stage. We're going to come all the way down. It's going to be dizzying. Whoa, I don't like this. I don't like it. I don't like it. We're going to come to our form. And we've got a lot of things going on here. I'm going to set the ID of our form is going to be equal to, the ID of the form is going to be equal to cat photo. Is that it? Is that all you want me to do? That's all you want me to do. So is it okay to have an empty ID? Jinx is asking, is it okay to have an empty ID? And this is a really, really good question. What do you mean by empty? So the ID and there's just nothing in it yet? It's okay to do that during development. I probably wouldn't leave it there if you yeah. So only really add it if you're gonna use it, I would say, just because it keeps it neat, it keeps it tidy. Felix, you're absolutely right. Both are selectors, but you're pointing out both of these are for the moment, let's go ahead and artificially abstract that away. They are all mechanisms through which we can select. But because one of those is called a selector, let's go ahead and abstract that away for a minute and keep this is a selector, this is a class. Well, let's go ahead and keep that um like gently artificial abstraction just for now, just for learners. Actually, when you use so when do you use ID and when do you use class? So what you use ID when it's a unique thing. So an ID is like we learned last week that an ID is like a name tag. So that's a one special. There's only one Jessica Rose in this project, and it's me. So if I set a rule and I say, "Hey, this rule is for Jessica Rose," I say, "Oh, you mean me?" Drat. Um, yeah. So you set an ID when it's only for that one specific element. So when it's special. Oh, cat photo form. I'm rubbish. What did I say? Did I say cat photo app? I did say cat photo app. ID should be cat photo form. And now it will pass. Yeah. Y'all are just consistently asking increasingly good questions. So we've just set our ID, but we're learning about CSS and IDs are HTML things, and we've already learned them. And I say, I hear you. I hear you. But we're reviewing HTML IDs because we're going to do some weird stuff with them with CSS. So we've learned that when we set a selector, we use the name of the HTML element and nothing. If we don't put anything, if we don't do anything weird to it, it's just vanilla, it's just plain old. And when we create a class, we put a full stop and then we make up a name of a class, human readable. And when we create rules for an ID, we use the hash first. So we say, hey, I know this ID exists somewhere within my HTML, or I know I'm going to go create it right now. I know this HTML is out there to use, this ID is out there to use. I'm going to say, here's a hash to say I'm setting rules just for Jessica Rose or just for cat photo element. So it exists within our style ones. Classes always have a full stop, and we reference IDs by putting the hash in front of them. We can do that. So we're going to use an ID. We're going to reference our cat photo form ID and give it a green background. And we're going to come down to the bottom, still inside our style tags, because that's how we do things. We're going to add that hash, and we're going to just write the name of the ID that we've used. Cat photo, hash or pound. Yeah. Oh, is it always called the hash for clarity? Thank you. Well, Adam. Thank you very much, my love. Cat photo form. And then we've got our wiggly braces. We love our wiggly braces. They're the most decorative of braces. And we're going to say our background color, we're going to set that to green. And I think the minute I put an N here, we're going to see our form. What shape will the green appear in? It's going to be a green. Yeah, it's a rectangle. It's always a rectangle. You say, well, ooh, is thick green border a class by itself? So it would, if we had other classes, would they be named thin black border or thick pink border? So you can name a class anything you want. Here, we've named our class thick green border because that's best for humans. So as a human, when I see this class and say, well, this class is called thick green border, I don't really have to read the rest of the CSS to get an idea of what's going to do. If I was going to have CSS for one of my elements or some of my elements that drew a thick, thin black border, I would probably use that naming convention. Yeah. So if I wanted thick pink borders, I probably name that class Think Pink Border, but you don't have to have those classes if you're not going to use that kind of styling. Jonathan, that's such a good question. And I really appreciate that. So there are no rules. Egg roll, you're after my own heart. We should make reasonable names for clarity. We do that because we like people. Computers don't care. You can name this one could be named Wiggly Cat Picture, and it'll still work. But if I, as a human, as your coworker, come down and I see Wiggly Cat Picture as the class, I'd be like, what is that? What does that do? And I'd have to investigate. One thing that we're going to be learning about in a bit, and you say, well, Jess, you assured me that HTML elements are all weird rectangles. And I was like, yeah, I assured you. You say, and these two weird rectangles are right next to each other in my code. I was like, yeah. We got this list, and then we've got this form there. You say, well, what's with this space? We're going to learn about that in just a bit. We're going to be learning about padding. Hey, so all HTML is weird rectangles, right? You really, well, I kind of believe you. I promise you, the more you work with this, the more you're like, oh, I mean, okay, all HTML elements are weird, right? It's been 6 years. I'm going to go back and find Jess in her nursing home by then. And I'm going to tell her, well, Jess, you were absolutely right. They're all just weird rectangles. And with my little cane, I'll be like, well, I told you. But we're going to talk about padding. And padding are ways we can squish and move our elements. And this is going to be conceptually weird because it moves them, but it moves them by adding extra padding. So they get pushed by there being more padding on one side. And this is going to feel super unnatural. Okay. So we're just going to do these until they feel normal. And again, that'll take about 47 years. So an element, and this is going to be the last lesson we look at. And then we're going to do some question and answer. And then, I'm not your boss and I'm not your mother. I can't tell you what to do. But then all of you are absolutely required to have a very good day. And to continue to do CSS as your homework, if you don't mind, please. So the 3 element that controls space. I love this invocation. I would like to give you, and it's not me giving you anything, it's you learning on your own, but let me be annoying. I would like to give you the power over space. Sounds very powerful. And the 3 elements that control space are padding and border and margin. A padding controls the amount of space between this element and this element. So it's say, hey, give me some space. I need a little bit of padding. Felix has put up a really, really useful explainer in text, which I think is really helpful. If you are watching this in the 2020s, hi, I'm sorry. Think about padding as the type of social distance you give each other these days as well. I generally like to have 1 to 2 meters of padding between other people. You just and this is letting your HTML element specify how much padding they want. Here we've got an example. This is margin, this is padding, and this is padding. Okay, we see a blue box and a red box that are nested within a yellow box. Note that the red box has more padding than the blue box. Matt Store is saying, remember when suits had shoulder pads? I think you'll find that I think I still have a jacket with shoulder pads. I should take those out. They could come back. They're not coming back. So our red box has more padding. It's got more space. It's got, between it and the border. I respect that. It just needs a little, like, the red box is me, where I'm just like, look, I need a little bit more space than everybody else. Let's be cool. When I increase the blue box's padding, it will increase the distance between the text and the border around it. So here, let's play with this. This feels weird, right? Change the padding on our blue box to match that of our red box. This just all feels super weird, right? I'm going to give you specific homework because I want you all to do some weird stuff with this. And we're going to do some weird stuff with this. I'm going to change the padding of my blue box to match my red box. My padding is 20 pixels. So when I come back to my blue box, I think when I change this to 20 pixels, it's going to make both of these boxes look the same, right? Hey, but let's get weird. That's 200. Okay. 200 pixels means that my text, the text element, has a whole bunch of space between it and the border. It's got a lot of things going on here. So, really, what I want to ask you to do for your additional homework is just play with this and get weird. Not just this assignment, but later on when we're looking at margins as well. I'm going to run all these tests and we're just going to look at the next assignment. All right. We're just going to eyeball it. We're just going to look at this together. And this is talking about margins. So, this is going to be the same kind of stuff where it's like, hey, I want you to get weird with space. And that's really the homework I want to continue to enjoin you to do. I want you to get weird. Yeah. And like what relaxing homework? Get weird. We've only got a couple minutes left. I know you all are terribly busy. What kinds of questions can I answer for you? I know we had at least someone who said, "Oh, I've got a specific lesson I want to take a look at." Does anybody else have any questions about philosophy or why speaking Croatian would have been very, very useful and I still haven't bothered to do it? Or yeah, CSS while we're here. I do apologize. Croatian's such a fun language, and I really wish I did speak it. So, oh, Monica, this is such a good question. I'm gonna put you on screen. And Monica says, well, with multiple classes, I can have multiple classes, but it doesn't seem like I can do this with IDs. What gives here? What's up with that? What's it? So an ID is unique. An ID is only for that one element, right? So if you're setting multiple rules, you're going to set those to the one element. So IDs should be unique, not just one per project, but also one per element. It's like if I said, oh, here's my name tag, I'm Jessica Rose, but I'm also John Smith. That sort of kind of undermines the philosophical concept of having a unique name or a unique name tag attached to that one. So bafflingly, it's just because that's the way CSS has been designed, that IDs are trying to be unique. And the question, like, how does it know if it's referencing a CSS style or an element's unique ID? And here I assume what you're asking is, well, how does the browser tell the difference between applying something like a class and applying an ID? And this comes down to inheritance. So we know that the order of importance, if you set a selector and then later set a class, that class will take over. If those two conflict, it'll take the class instead. And if you later so let's say we're talking about background colors. And I say, actually, let's go ahead and write this code. No, let's not. That's going to be complex. Let me stop the screen. Let me get both of my little ham hands out. So if I set the background color to pink using a selector, actually, no, I've lied. Let's go ahead and do this. Yeah, let's demonstrate the hierarchy. Magistore is really saying this in a beautiful way. Like there's a hierarchy here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do three things. We're going to take our H2, and I'm going to set a background color. That worked. That set it as pink, right? And I'm going to create a class here And this class is called No Blue because these two are fighting. And here I'm going to say the background color blue. I have to set my H2. I'm going to add this to my H2. And that's changed it to blue. And you might say, and this is such a good question, how does it know? And it sort of doesn't. So what it's doing is it's coming down and it's reading in an order. And so quickly before you can see it, what it's doing is it's saying, hey, CSS, it's like, hey, when you see an H2, make the background pink for me. It says, yeah, cool. And then it's continuing to read down and it says, oh, actually, when you see this class, make it blue. And CSS knows that classes are more important. Ooh, heck, classes are more important than selectors. And it says, oh, I'll make this pink. Oh, I'm not going to make this pink. I've just gotten the instructions to make it blue from somebody higher up in the command. And then we can go ahead and do this with an ID instead. And our ID is equal to red wins. No, red is going to be bad because the black wins. And this means when I come up here and I set a style rule for black wins, yeah. So here we've got 3 different rules being applied to the background of the same element. But because there's a hierarchy, and you'll be able to feel these out, because here where we've set a selector, oh, we've got a really good question. Let me finish this one, and I'll answer your very, very good question, Isa. So when we've set this as a selector, that our background color is pink, that's the least powerful way to set it. And when we set it as a class, that's a more powerful voice that overrules. So, you can't have pink. I'm more powerful than you. It's like a stronger Pokemon coming over and saying, nope, we do what I want. And then when we set the rule for the ID, this is the most powerful way to do it that we've learned so far. Later, we're going to learn an overarching. There's a way to overrule everyone that says, I like ignore anything else I've said. Here's an important flag, and the important will go ahead and overrule everything else. But so far, we've learned that selectors are the least specific. So they apply to all of the elements of that type. They're also the least powerful. And then you've got classes, which are more specific. You're putting one or multiple elements of different kinds in a club with rules. And that's more powerful. That overrules select. And then we learn about IDs, and those are the most specific. There should only be one. Oh, that's such a good point. And there should only be one, and that's going to overrule everything else. Ragnarok is pointing out important. If we're talking about these in terms of a selector's a Pichu and a class is a Pikachu and a ID is a oh gosh, what's Raichu? Important would be like the Pokemon trainer to be like, no, all of you, hush, listen to me. Isa's asking, are all modern web browsers compatible with responsive web design? Yep, mostly, except for edge cases, yes. Eggroll, you've got a fantastic question. So what's the difference between a border and a margin? So a border is something drawn outside of your element, so around your element, whereas margins are the wiggle space between your elements. It's going to feel weird. We're going to do you all are going to do some more of them as homework. It's going to feel less weird the more you touch them. So I can just, borders drawn outside and the margin's the padding, but not the actual pad. A margin's the wiggle space. It's not going to make any sense. I'm just going to send you to do more of the assignments. That's not fair, but I'm very mean. I'm going to go ahead because all of you have been here for hours, and I cannot imagine that this is interesting for hours. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wander off into the very rare sunshine of the United Kingdom and have a very laid back day. You will have you will have two pieces of homework. What? You will have three pieces of homework. The first one is to go ahead and try and get at least 50% of the way through the CSS lessons on your own. I'd love to see you go a little further because it's a lot easier to get that extra padding and not have to catch up. I'm also going to absolutely require you to have the easiest day that you can. Yeah. Um, and if it's not a bother, could you please let me know if you have any feedback at all? You can fuss at me here in the chat. But that's everybody can see that, isn't it? You can go ahead and let us know over on the forum. So there's a forum for the boot camp if you haven't joined yet. Or you can email me. It's bootcamp@classcentral.com. And that's going to come right to me. Just say, oh, Jess, I want these. I want more streams. I want these. I want I want the whole class to go faster. I want it to go slower. I want this to be in Dutch. I can't guarantee that I can meet all of your feedback, but even if it's something I can't do or something I can't do now, um, yeah, it's gonna be something to try. Somebody's asking, "Hey, can we do another Saturday stream, another social sometime soon?" We'll go ahead and try that. So yeah, let's go ahead and we'll explore Saturday streams. One of the challenges I confess that one of the limitations of this is that because these are free, I do still have to do my contracting work to pay the bills, and a lot of that lands on weekends. We'll go ahead and we're having some talks with sponsors to make this a bit more sustainable. And if you're saying, "Hey, do you know what? Send feedback about time zones. Say, hey, I'm based here. I want this after work, or I want this on weekends." I can't promise I'll give you everything, but that kind of feedback makes it really, really useful to know what's going on. You all have been absolutely beautiful to learn alongside. If you haven't yet and you want to, go ahead and sign up for the boot camp. Um, yeah, go ahead and sign up for the boot camp. It's completely free. We've gotten through the HTML bits and the CSS bits. So if you're brand new, you can still catch up. We're going real slow. It's super chill. Um, Everything's going to be fun. Our homework really is send me some feedback if you want. Try and get through about 50% of the way through, halfway through the CSS. And your other homework is to have a really nice day if you can. I'm going to let you go. Please, please have a blissful afternoon or middle of the night or morning. Bye, my loves.